My name is Megan Acevedo, and I will be presenting the Humboldt Regional Climate Action Plan and EIR Public Scoping Period. So this meeting is to initiate the public EIR process, inform the community and agencies about the plan, and receive comments to better scope the analysis in the EIR. And we will inform the community about future opportunities for input. And we will go over a brief project background and summary. And then we're going to go through an overview of CEQA and the environmental review process. We'll go over the summary of environmental impact report scope and schedule. And then we'll allow for public comment on the scope of the EIR. So logistics, we are recording this meeting today, and this will be available later on our YouTube page. And in order to stay up to date with the Climate Action Plan progress and the EIR, please go to our website here and sign up for the Notify Me. And we do send out press releases for updates frequently. So we're going to go through project overview. This includes the background, the plan location, the purpose of the climate action plan, the summary of greenhouse gas analysis and targets, strategy development, measures, and the process. So brief background, we started the climate action plan in 2019, and this included the county, incorporated cities, and Redwood Coast Energy Authority. And since then, we've continued collaborating with those partners, as well as other regional partners, including Humboldt Transit Authority, Humboldt County Association Organization of Governments, and Humboldt Waste Management Authority. And we have developed a regional climate action plan that has achieved a qualified plan. So we've released the draft CAP for public review on August 14th, and we will receive comments on that document up until September 20th, Friday, September 20th. And we released the notice of preparation for the EIR on Friday, August 30th, and we're allowing for comments on the EIR scoping up until, I believe it's Friday, September 30th. So what is a CEQA qualified cap? A CEQA qualified cap would include a baseline of greenhouse gas emissions in order to forecast targets for greenhouse gas reduction. And this would need to be in line with state targets. It will guide the county and other jurisdictions on how to achieve those targets through measures and actions. It includes tracking and monitoring mechanisms. And the plan itself will go through environmental review. And that includes the EIR that we are currently starting now. And a CEQA qualified climate action plan would allow for CEQA streamlining of future projects. So the plan's location is all of Humboldt County. This includes unincorporated areas and all incorporated cities. And the plan would apply to existing and proposed development and government operations. And no specific development is proposed with the plan. The purpose of the plan is to mitigate local greenhouse gas emissions in line with state targets. And that is to meet a target from SB 32 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. And AB 1279 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 85% below 1990 levels and reach carbon neutrality by 2045. And this, as I said, would allow for streamlining of greenhouse gas emissions analysis for future development projects in the region. So the plan includes a baseline greenhouse gas emission inventory for 2022, and this focuses on sectors that the local governments have jurisdictional control or influence over. The primary contributors were found to be on-road transportation with 73% of local greenhouse gas emissions, and building energy from natural gas in second place with 13% of local greenhouse gas emissions. And with that, we have developed a forecast for greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. This quantifies the amount of carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions that we would need to reduce locally to reach the state goals. So we see in the table to the right that we'll have to reach, it's 159 metric tons of CO2 emissions by 2045. And we'll need to also reach, it's 1.2 million metric tons of CO2 emission reductions by 2030. This diagram shows our CAP strategy. We're going to focus on renewable energy, building electrification, VMT reduction, and that's for vehicle miles traveled, and increasing zero emission vehicle use, reducing organic waste to landfills, and focusing on research and feasibility for sequestration. And the strategy also identifies rural versus urban areas in the county. So here are some specific measures. There are 29 measures in total that fall under these different categories. So the main measure to address first is to establish a regional climate committee that will be responsible for tracking the progress of the measures and how we're reaching our goals. So each of these measures does identify urban versus rural. We're going to focus on decarbonizing building energy and electrification, increasing transportation and zero emission vehicle use, reducing the solid waste that goes to landfills, decarbonizing wastewater treatment processes, and researching and research and feasibility for carbon sequestration. So the planning process moving forward with the CAP, this will include feedback from the county, incorporated cities, and other regional partners to gather data and information. And with the diagram at the bottom, it shows that we'll update the inventory and then update the measures and actions until we reach the targets of the climate action plan. So the ultimate goal for the regional climate action plan is with CEQA streamlining for future development projects. And a consistency checklist will be required to enforce the implementation of applicable greenhouse gas reduction measures on projects that wish to utilize CEQA streamlining. So now we'll go through the overview of the EIR process. So the purpose of environmental review, environmental impact reports, the EIR scope for this project and alternatives, and then CEQA steps and opportunities for future input, and what the focus of today's input. So the environmental review process, why is it required? So we want to evaluate projects and their environmental effects. And with that evaluation, we can identify how to reduce significant effects where feasible. And this will also allow for public involvement and disclosure of the project to the public. And that will allow for informed decision making. And an environmental impact report discloses the potential effects. It identifies feasible mitigation measures, describes the feasible alternatives to a proposed project, and requires certification for a project to be approved. So we have identified that the cap could result in significant effects on the following environmental sectors. That includes aesthetics, air quality, biological, agricultural, and forestry resources, cultural and tribal cultural resources, greenhouse gas emissions and energy, cumulative effects, land use and population and housing, noise, transportation, utilities and service systems, solid waste, septic system, and sewer capacity. And effects found not to be significant with this project are geology, soils, and mineral resources, hazards, hazardous materials, and wildfire, hydrology and water quality, and public services and recreation. A couple of alternatives that are included, will be included in the EIR are carbon credit alternative and sustainable communities alternative, which will focus building around mobility hubs. And here's a diagram of the next steps. So we've issued the NOP of the EIR. And we are currently in the EIR agency and public scoping period. That is our meeting today. And we will accept comments, review and evaluate the comments, perform technical analysis on those comments, and then circulate the draft EIR for a future public review. We will then hold another public meeting on the draft EIR, which will allow for more comments, and we'll respond to comments and prepare the final EIR, which will then result in EIR certification. So the focus of input for today's meeting, we'd like to know what scope of environmental analysis are felt to be necessary to include. And we'd like to hear your ideas for feasible mitigation measures, any suggestions for alternatives to the project to reduce or avoid impacts, and identify public agencies, public and private groups, and individuals that the county should notice regarding this project. So if you'd like to send a written comment, please send them to me by 5 p.m. on Friday, September 30th. And we'll leave this slide up for information. And we'll now open it up for questions about the climate action plan. And then we'll receive comments.
So we'll go ahead and start here in the room. Does anybody have any questions on the climate action plan right now?
Well, I'm curious about the consistency checklist or the CEQA streamlining. Is there more information available about what that will actually consist of?
That will address the final components of the climate action plan, regional climate action plan before it's adopted. The reason it's not prepared yet, it'll be prepared at the time the final EIR is put out, because up until that point, the RCAP is subject to modification. And so gonna prepare that to be consistent with the RCAP at the very end.
Okay,
And so basically what it's gonna do is provide a checklist that identifies things that a development project would need to do to be in compliance with the regional climate or the supply information.
so improving FEIR would improving of that.
The final RCAP approval will include approval of that checklist, yes. Thanks for that question. I hope that helps. So Colin Fisk, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to I guess echo the desire to see that checklist and really I guess to articulate that we think it can and should be provided as part of the project. Of course, the entire RCAP is subject to change throughout the process. The checklist can also be changed, but it seems really critical to understanding how what the impact of the RCAP as a CEQA project will be, because just on its face, it's very difficult to discern how the CEQA streamlining will be implemented, how each of these measures will be weighed as applying to any particular future project. Thanks.
Appreciate that comment, Colin. It is, we'll see what we can do. So if there's no other questions, see Dan Chandler. Go ahead, Dan.
Maybe you can explain how the response to the RCAP and the NOP are working together. I know that from our response is not in, and I don't know if the city's responses are into the RCAP, but there are unfortunately seemingly some significant changes that would have to happen in order to meet the 40% changes in the RCAP because of mostly, I think, misunderstanding of how things work in Humboldt, but there are other reasons. And so I'm just a little concerned, sort of like Rex Bone, I think, at the supervisors meeting about how the suggestions that people are making regarding the RCAP can be addressed in time to affect the EIR.
So thanks for the question. The way it's currently planned right now is that we're going to take comments, the public comments, focusing specifically on the RCAP, and then take comments from the public, receive them from the different jurisdictions who are involved and the other agencies that are involved. And as you'll recall, the Board of Supervisors wanted to see that come back before they gave their final blessing on that. So that will all be put together, all the intended changes that will be made in response to the public comments will be addressed and presented to the board. And when that's approved, that will then become the project description for the EIR analysis. We're taking comments on the NOP, which really has a slightly different focus, which is what are the potential environmental impacts that we should be careful to avoid. And part of the NOP process is really to take into consideration members of the public or agencies who may have detailed local knowledge that would indicate things that should really be considered. And so we're going to use the NOP comments to really help expand our analysis and understand areas that perhaps weren't considered when the original NOP was prepared. But then we're going to use those comments to address those issues. They really are on two separate tracks. It would be nice to have, we're trying to extend a little bit the comment period on the, already have extended the comment period on the RCAP to make sure the public and the jurisdictions are able to give input. And then with respect to the NOP, if there's anything that's at conflict there, we'll have to visit that, but we're not anticipating that. So we're really on a parallel path. Part of the reason for the parallel path is we do want to get this RCAP and the EIR done as quickly as possible and have it before the decision makers as quickly as possible so we can get about the business of implementation.
Okay, thank you for the explanation.
Yep. Continue to take comments or questions on the RCAP. I mean, we do want to be intentional about being able to try to answer questions about that, just simply because for you as the informed public to be able to give us good comments. We know that it's helpful to have a complete understanding, so we want to work towards it. Yes.
I'm just speaking just as a member of the public and just for myself, not as a member of any group. But this relies so heavily on electrical energy, and we know the pretty poor condition of the electrical grid in Humboldt. Is it reasonable to assume that PG&E will have it together in time to meet these deadlines? And if so, how?
Yeah. The short answer to that is we can't assume that an agency that or a company that we have no control over is going to have their stuff together to perform in a way that we need them to. So in all likelihood, probably a lot of the EIR's impact analysis is going to be centering right around that issue of the upgrades that are needed to make this happen. In fact, one of the additional alternatives that at least I've started to think about this morning is really starting to put in an alternative that would address a decentralized generation system, so that there, perhaps are small renewable generating systems, either wind or solar or battery backups, located at the end of lines, so that those transmission lines or distribution lines don't need, it is distribution, don't need to be upgraded quite so much, and to really start to develop a kind of a policy approach to work with RCEA to have that happen. Anybody else? Any things, Colin? Yeah.
I'm sorry, are you taking scoping comments now or still questions?
I was just going to open that up, so you're right on time.
Okay, great. Well, so we'll be submitting written comments, but I did want to bring up a couple of things briefly. One is that as I think we'd really like to see the transportation related targets, the VMT and mode shift targets in particular, be aligned with the regional transportation plan, and if that isn't done, at least to see that analyzed as an alternative in the EIR, so that we can see what the difference in environmental impacts would be under that scenario. And then we'd also I'd like to propose that the county should consider the 15% per capita VMT reduction as the transportation threshold for this project, even though it is not itself a residential project, because one of its primary purposes is to streamline residential projects. We think that that would be the sort of logical threshold to adopt. Thanks.
Thanks, Colin. So there's a, perhaps totally get your comment, totally accept it. There's a subtle distinction there that we may want to talk about at some point, but I appreciate the comment. Gary Hughes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I guess I am going to go ahead and offer a scoping comment.
Sure. Yeah.
My name is Gary Hughes, and I work as the Americas Program Coordinator with the organization Biofuel Watch. I work a great deal in Latin America, internationally, and then also in California. And I'm offering these comments almost exclusively addressing the necessary scope of environmental analysis for the Humboldt Regional Climate Action Plan. I'm actually partners in a property in Humboldt County, so let me just say that I understand the dilemma that we are all facing. But I'd like to offer some specific comments to just a couple of items that jumped out to me in the frame of the work that I do with Biofuel Watch, namely renewable diesel. There's a number of issues here around direct land use change and indirect land use change associated with feedstocks production for making renewable diesel. The EIR needs to take a good look at issues of deforestation and native ecosystem impacts, but also needs to address these issues in terms of commodity market elasticities and resource displacement. For instance, how using soy to make liquid biofuels in the USA means that increasing amounts of palm oil are being imported to the United States to substitute for soy that was previously used in food products. Needs to be a thorough assessment of food system impacts and economic impacts from making fuel from food. And the EIR needs to look at the impacts on electrification policies by relying on renewable diesel, directly from relying on the liquid fuel system and cumulatively with other policy mechanisms. The EIR needs to look at the transportation impacts of fuel product importation to Humboldt County, whether by marine or terrestrial modes. The EIR needs to look at fuel spill risks in marine and terrestrial environments. There needs to be a full analysis of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the production of these fuels, and especially those emissions specific to the refining process. And then as well, it's necessary to assess the fuel production risks, the process risks, and the public health and safety issues at the point of fuel product manufacture and refining. Those are really the issues that I wanted to bring up around renewable diesel for the EIR. Now I wanted to speak briefly about deforestation and land use change associated with the natural and working lands chapter now of the RCAP. The EIR must address how silviculture activities, essentially logging, along with associated road building and road maintenance, are a major source of both biogenic and fossil fuel related emissions. They're a major contributor to other climate damages, such as increased wildfire risk and water shortages. I would challenge then, by including natural and working lands in the RCAP, you're definitely coming into issues of wildfire. So you try to make it sound like it's not significant, but I think that's incorrect. The EIR must provide a scientifically robust estimate of the GHG emissions resulting from silviculture activities. And it must assess how industrial logging activities generate significant fossil fuel related GHGs through the operation of logging equipment, the fertilizers, pesticide applications, and the milling and manufacturing, the transport of logs and end-use products, and the disposal of wood products in landfills. So also a good look at the climate stressors that can be exacerbated by logging and road building, These include heat waves, droughts, water shortages, wildfires, wind damage, landslides, floods, warming waters, harmful algae blooms, insects, disease, exotic species, and biodiversity loss. All of these are related to the natural and working lands segment as described in the RCAP. So there's a lot in the RCAP, and like I said, I understand the immensity of what's at hand, but on behalf of our organization, a couple of last comments now on how biomass to hydrogen and some carbon capture concepts have been floated in the RCAP. To know that if you're to acquire hydrogen from woody biomass, it requires production of a syngas by heating the biomass, which produces CO2, carbon monoxide, and impurities, including hydrocarbons and particulate matter. So all of those impacts from the production processes must be evaluated. The energy efficiencies in any industrial process to secure hydrogen from woody biomass must be analyzed. The EIR must address or evaluate the uncertainties about whether biomass gasification can be actually deployed at scale in any commercially viable way. So looking at the economic realities of this proposal, addressing uncertainties regarding non-homogeneous feedstocks, production of those impurities and byproducts, and what would be how things around fuel gases, char and chemicals, and byproducts like fly ash, nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, and tar would be addressed. So all of these things need to be addressed in terms of understanding a gasification process. There's a lot more that can be said, but I also really believe that this EIR needs to take a really close look at all the science around carbon trading. There's a lot of assumptions around the efficacy of carbon credits, and that was mentioned now in the presentation. There's a lot of economic issues. There's also a number of environmental justice issues that need to be addressed. Those of us working in California know that carbon trading is replete with some very severe environmental justice challenges. So that's plenty. Thank you so much for your time. And also, I really want to express my appreciation to the county for making it possible to provide comment like this. We know we live in the land of the long drives, and it's not, always possible to be there in person. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to make this comment by Zoom.
Thank you, Gary. Is there anybody else who would like to make comments on the scoping of the EIR? Not seeing any hands up.
One more comment.
Yes.
And this is just a rumor, I go back and forth, that much of the electricity could end up not benefiting our immediate area. It could be sent other places. Yeah. I'm speaking more specifically of the wind project.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was just wondering if that could be addressed in the
It'll be referenced. It may not be directly addressed. I mean, the RCAP does identify the need to continue to lobby with not only the wind developers, the transmission developer, the port developer, to make sure there is benefit coming to this region, and we continue to do that. So important comments, or important consideration. Okay, I don't see any other hands up. I don't see any more comments. I want to say thank you to everybody. I'll give you the count of 3, going once, twice, Going 3 times to make any additional comments. But if not, I just really want to thank you for your thoughtful comments, your thoughtful consideration. We look forward to those of you who will be providing written comments to us, and we will look forward to continuing to work with you to not only refine the RCAP to be as beneficial to this region as possible, but also to develop an EIR that adequately discloses the potential environmental effects, mitigates them to the extent feasible, and develops alternatives that are meaningful. So thanks, everybody. We're gonna bring this to a close.